The examiner's report is out for the March-June 24 exam. And in this video, I'm going to give you some highlights and top tips. But I'm not going to tell you too much about the detail of the questions because I really want you to use this mock as part of your final exam preparation. Right, so let's get stuck in to the key points out of the report. The exam that was published here was one of the new style ROM questions in question 1. And in the new style ROM question, the examiner tells you what the risks of material misstatement are and asks you to explain why these are significant risks. And that can really throw some students because it's a slightly different sort of question to what they're expecting. But don't let it throw you if it comes up in your exam. The approach that's required is very, very similar to a standard ROM or audit risk question. You always start off by assessing whether the issue is material against your materiality level. You'll always explain why their accounting treatment is incorrect. You'll try to develop your point, to add depth to it by linking in other facts from the scenario. Perhaps there's an analytical procedure you can do, a nice little percentage change calculation that will add depth to your risk. Or perhaps you could link it in with a wider fact, maybe from a different exhibit or from the introductory exhibit that adds depth to the risk when you explain how they link together. Now, the bit that is slightly different with this new style ROM question is you should try to focus in your answer on explaining why this risk is particularly significant. Rather than just explaining the risk, it's really significant. We've really picked it out because of this, this, and this. That's how it's slightly different, but not very different to a normal ROM question. The next thing that stood out to me from this report is that the examiner highlighted that many students aren't earning the easy marks for materiality. Some students are, but a lot of students are missing these really, really easy marks. And given that the pass rate in AAA, well, it's low, isn't it? But the pass mark, 50%, the most common failing marks are 47, 48, and 49. And if that's you and you haven't earned these 4 easy marks, you'll be really kicking yourself. So make sure you get them. 3 of them are technical marks for stating the correct range. So if it's PBT, it's 5 to 10% of the PBT figure. That's your materiality range, which you then calculate using the PBT figure for the year that's being audited. Then you set your materiality level somewhere in that range. I always set it at the low end of the range, at the 5% point. Always. And the reason for that is because you set a low materiality when it's a high risk audit. When there are things in the scenario that you can use to explain why this audit is particularly high risk. And I can always find those things in the scenario. Always. Because if there isn't a lot of risks in the scenario, the question doesn't work. So I bring in 1 or 2 things that make me say this is a particularly high risk audit. The business has changed significantly because they've expanded overseas. And so there's a higher risk of misstatement because management are doing things for the first time. Higher risk they'll get things wrong. Now that's the 3 easy technical marks. And then the easy professional skills mark is for using your materiality level. So if you've calculated materiality as 1 million, then you have to assess each of your risks, each of your issues, the size of the issue against that 1 million materiality level. It's really odd. Some students calculate the 1 million and then they don't use it when they're assessing their risks. Don't let that be you because you miss out on an easy professional skills mark. Next, a real thing that stood out to me from this report was the amount that the examiner spoke about judgment. How judgment is a key professional skill and a lot of students don't demonstrate it sufficiently. So how you can demonstrate judgment in the exam is in the risk question, so ROM question, you really try to focus on where management have used their judgment. Management have made an assumption over something. Because that's the kind of area where management can be biased. They can try to overstate the number, make it look better so that it improves the performance of the business. And the top students link that judgment point to a management bias indicator, like there's a bonus scheme, or the company is preparing for listing, or someone is retiring and is selling the business. All reasons they might want to overstate the performance of the company. And in a procedures question, well, you will score a judgment professional skills mark if you target your procedures on the things that are most likely to be wrong with the thing that you're being asked to audit. So the things that are most likely to be wrong is where management have used their judgment. And so you try to focus your procedures on those particular areas. Not only does that earn you technical marks, it also earns you a professional skills mark for judgment, a double win. My fourth tip for you, in ethics questions, and this exam had quite a lot of ethics within it. In ethics questions, weaker students will state that there is a familiarity threat, and they'll then write out the textbook definition of a familiarity threat, like we're too close to, we have a relationship that makes us too close and not objective to the client. They'll write something like that, and they will score no marks for it. And the reason they don't score any marks is because they've taken their pre-learned knowledge and written it down on the exam paper. That doesn't really work in AAA. What you have to do is take your knowledge of the familiarity threat and explain why it exists in this particular scenario. Could be due to the amount of time that the audit partner has been in place. It might be too long. But you have to develop it, and you have to say, I can see that this risk has actually materialized here because the audit partner hasn't done their review properly, and perhaps they were expecting all the numbers to be right because they're too familiar or too close to the client. So it's explaining why the threat exists in the context of the scenario, and then saying how the risk has actually shown itself or manifested in the scenario. That's what you score the marks for. My next tip is around, well, they published a question here around matters to consider and audit evidence that you expect to be on the file. Most students are pretty good at the audit evidence bit, but a lot of them don't really answer the question when the examiner asks, what are the matters to consider? And it's a slightly cryptic question, right? It's not a very clear question. But what the examiner really wants you to do when they say matters to consider and audit evidence, what they want you to do is to explain the accounting treatment. What's the correct accounting treatment? How have they accounted for it? Is it correct or incorrect? It's probably going to be incorrect. So your job is to explain how they've accounted for this matter incorrectly. Now, one reason that students might do this question badly, and a lot of them do, is because they don't realise they're supposed to talk about the accounting treatment. And the second reason is because they might not have the required knowledge from SBR. And at least 10 marks in the exam for AAA are going to be reliant on your SBR knowledge. So if you're looking to do some traditional learning type revision as preparation for the exam, the best thing you can do is go back and revise your accounting standards. Everything that was in SBR, the international accounting standards, is potentially examinable in AAA. They expect you to just know it. Now, it doesn't matter what variant of the exam you're doing, UK, Ireland, Singapore, it is the international accounting standards, so IFRS, which you need to know. And my sixth tip out of this document was around audit opinions. Now, in this exam, there's typically a 5-mark question, very often a 5-mark question for discussing the impact on the audit opinion and on the audit report. And one thing that often comes up, and it did come up in the exam that they've published here and in these examiners' comments, is that students don't do a good job when discussing pervasiveness. They're very good at saying whether the issue is material, right? Doing a calculation and assessing whether this issue is material against PBT or total assets or whatever it is. They're good at that, but they are less good at then discussing whether it's pervasive. And a really good approach, so that you can earn judgment marks for a discussion, a genuine discussion, is to try and find a reason it is pervasive. It is a massive issue. So look for things like, does it impact many places in the financial statements? Or is the issue isolated, making it not pervasive? Does it turn profit to a loss, making it pervasive? Does it mean a bank loan covenant is going to be breached if they correct this misstatement? Or is this area of something that is of fundamental importance to a user of the financial statements, which would make it pervasive? So what I try to do is find some reasons in the scenario why it might be pervasive. So I argue it is, and I argue that it isn't pervasive, arguing both sides, and then I have a justified conclusion as to whether it is pervasive or not. And if you do that, it earns you more technical marks and more professional skills marks too. A lovely double win. Well, you already know that the full video is on YouTube because you are watching this on YouTube. But if you want more help with AAA, then I'm here for you. So you can WhatsApp me, or if you just Google Ben Wilson, I'm actually the #1 Ben Wilson that comes up on Google. You can find loads more free resources on my website. Best of luck with the exam.